Gates doesn't want to be Speaker, and he has no idea who else should be Speaker. He just knows Kevin McCarthy shouldn't be Speaker. And why would anybody want to be Speaker if one guy has the power to throw you overboard? The Democrats are laughing at the Republicans now. The Republicans just dethroned their best fundraiser and throttled the impeachment inquiry. So, what's going to happen this week? Nothing. Now, that could be good. We don't know. But there's a lot going on in the country. Crime, the border, stock market today took a bath. And the Republicans aren't going to vote for the new Speaker until next Wednesday.
Now on to reports of apparently rampant grift inside the Trump White House, touching on everything from tech to foreign policy. Among the new revelations, the New York Times reporting that tech billionaire David Sacks, the administration's so-called AI czar, is setting policies that could potentially benefit him personally. According to a Times analysis of his financial disclosures, Sacks has, quote, 708 tech investments, including at least 449 stakes in companies with ties to artificial intelligence that could be aided directly or indirectly by his policies.
Okay, so things are moving fast now, and I need you to understand exactly what's happening with this impeachment push, because the developments over the past 24 hours represent a significant escalation in the conflict between Democrats and President Trump. Representative Sri Thanadar of Michigan just announced new articles of impeachment against Trump on December 4, 2025, specifically targeting his attacks on federal judges who have been ruling against his administration's policies. This comes on top of existing impeachment resolutions that are already pending in Congress. H.Res. 353 with 7 articles of impeachment filed back in April, and Res. 537 focused on abuse of war powers filed in June. The pressure is building. Democrats are clearly trying to force action before the end of the year, and the political and legal dynamics are converging in ways that could have major consequences. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Guarantors of peace. The journal goes on to quote, a cast of businessmen close to the Trump administration have been looking to position themselves as new economic links between the United States and Russia.
Putin's the invader. He's the dictator. He's murdered all of his opponents. But I just don't see that moral clarity coming from the White House. Russia, if they get a favorable agreement with Ukraine.
Let me walk you through exactly what's in these impeachment articles, because the substance matters enormously for understanding what Democrats are trying to accomplish and what arguments they're making. AG.res. Every workery. 353, the comprehensive resolution filed on April 28, contains 7 distinct articles of impeachment covering an extraordinary range of alleged misconduct. Article 1 alleges obstruction of Congress. Article 2 alleges usurpation of congressional appropriations power, essentially claiming Trump is spending money in ways Congress never authorized. Article 3 alleges abuse of trade and tariff authority. Article 4 alleges violations of the First Amendment. Article 5 alleges bribery. And crucially, additional articles allege what the resolution describes as tyranny, a term that goes to the heart of constitutional concerns about a president who claims he's above the law. Hey.res.537, filed on June 24th, focuses specifically on abuse of war powers related to unauthorized military strikes on Iran conducted without congressional authorization. This resolution argues that Trump exceeded his constitutional authority by ordering military action against a foreign nation without the declaration of war or authorization for use of military force that the Constitution requires Congress to provide. The Iran strikes we covered previously raised exactly these constitutional concerns, and this resolution attempts to hold Trump accountable through the impeachment process. And now, the Nedar's new announcement adds fresh articles specifically targeting Trump's attacks on the judiciary. His pattern of calling judges lunatics, his claims that the Constitution doesn't apply to him, his threats against judges who rule against him, and his general campaign to delegitimize judicial oversight of executive power. This focus on judicial independence connects directly to the dramatic events we covered with the Supreme Court justice walkout and the escalating conflict between Trump and the courts. Come on, think about what it means that there are now multiple impeachment resolutions pending, with Democrats actively pushing for action before the year ends. This isn't just political theater or messaging. It's a systematic effort to document and address what Democrats argue is a pattern of constitutional violations that goes far beyond anything previous presidents have done. The scope of the allegations across these resolutions is genuinely extraordinary. Obstruction, bribery, abuse of war powers, violations of constitutional rights, usurpation of congressional authority, and what they're calling tyranny. That's not a narrow technical dispute about one policy. That's an argument that the president has fundamentally violated his oath of office across multiple domains. Representative Al Green has been renewing his calls for impeachment as well, making the case publicly that Trump's conduct requires congressional action regardless of the political consequences. Green has been a consistent voice for impeachment since Trump's first term, and his continued advocacy signals that this isn't just a few isolated Democrats, but a significant faction of the party that views removal as both justified and necessary. The timing of this push matters enormously for understanding the political strategy involved. House Democrats know they don't control the chamber, Republicans have the majority, and Speaker Johnson would have to allow impeachment proceedings to move forward. That's not going to happen in the current political environment where Republicans are defending Trump despite everything. So why push impeachment now? The answer is partly about the 2026 elections. By forcing votes and debates on impeachment, Democrats create opportunities to highlight Trump's alleged misconduct and put Republican members on record defending him. Every Republican who votes against impeachment can be targeted in the midterms as having supported a president accused of bribery, obstruction, and tyranny. The political utility doesn't depend on actually removing Trump. It depends on making the case to voters and creating accountability moments that can be used in campaigns. But there's also a genuine constitutional argument that Democrats are making. If Trump is violating his oath and exceeding his authority in the ways these resolutions allege, Congress has a duty to act regardless of whether removal is politically achievable. The Constitution provides impeachment as the remedy for presidential misconduct. Not using that remedy when misconduct occurs normalizes the violations and signals that future presidents can do the same things without consequence. Some Democrats believe they have an obligation to pursue impeachment, even if it fails simply to establish that this conduct is unacceptable. The connection to Trump's judicial attacks is particularly significant because it ties impeachment to the ongoing conflict between the executive and judicial branches. When Trump attacks judges as lunatics and claims the Constitution doesn't apply to him, he's not just engaging in rhetorical excess, he's undermining the legitimacy of the institution charged with ensuring his administration operates within legal bounds. If courts can't effectively constrain presidential power because the president has convinced enough people that courts are illegitimate, the entire constitutional system breaks down. Impeachment becomes one of the few remaining remedies. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly what's in these impeachment resolutions and what specific conduct they target. We're going to look at the political dynamics and what Democrats hope to accomplish even in a Republican-controlled House. We're going to examine how this connects to the broader pattern of Trump's conflicts with courts and constitutional constraints. And we're going to discuss what all of this means for the 2026 elections and the future of accountability for presidential misconduct. Let's get into it. All right, let's get into the specific substance of these impeachment resolutions, because understanding what's actually alleged helps explain why Democrats are pushing so hard and what arguments they're making about Trump's fitness for office and compliance with constitutional requirements. 353, filed on April 28, 2025, is the most comprehensive of the pending resolutions, with 7 distinct articles of impeachment. Each article addresses a different category of alleged misconduct, and together they paint a picture of what Democrats argue is a systematic pattern of constitutional violations and abuse of power. Article 1 alleges obstruction of Congress, specifically that Trump has impeded congressional oversight functions by refusing to provide documents, blocking witness testimony, and otherwise preventing Congress from carrying out its constitutional duty to oversee the executive branch. This connects to numerous disputes over the past year where the administration has refused to cooperate with congressional investigations, claimed executive privilege over materials Congress sought, and instructed current and former officials not to testify. Democrats argue this pattern constitutes obstruction that undermines the separation of powers. Article 2 alleges usurpation of congressional appropriations power. Under the Constitution, Congress controls government spending. The executive branch can only spend money that Congress has appropriated for specified purposes. This article alleges that Trump has spent federal funds in ways Congress never authorized, redirected appropriated money to purposes Congress didn't approve, and otherwise violated the fundamental constitutional principle that the power of the purse belongs to the legislature, not the president. The specific examples include border wall construction funding that was redirected from other accounts and various emergency declarations used to access funds Congress had designated for different purposes. Article 3 focuses on abuse of trade and tariff authority. While presidents have significant statutory authority over trade policy, Democrats argue Trump has exceeded that authority by imposing tariffs for purposes unrelated to the statutory grants of power, using trade authority as a political weapon rather than a tool for legitimate trade policy objectives. The tariffs on various countries that we've covered and the resulting economic disruptions and legal challenges form the basis for this article's allegations. Article 4 alleges First Amendment violations, specifically that Trump has used government power to punish speech and press coverage he dislikes, threatened media organizations, and otherwise violated constitutional protections for free expression. This includes his attacks on specific journalists and media outlets, his suggestions that broadcast licenses should be revoked for networks that cover him critically, and his general pattern of using presidential power to chill protected speech. Article 5 alleges bribery. Though the specific conduct underlying this allegation requires careful examination, the constitutional standard for impeachable bribery doesn't necessarily match the criminal statute. It encompasses situations where officials use their power to extract personal benefits or corrupt the governmental process. Democrats argue various aspects of Trump's conduct meet this standard, though the specifics are contested. The final articles address what the resolution describes as tyranny, a dramatic term that captures the essence of concerns about a president who claims constitutional limits don't apply to him. This article connects to Trump's statements about the Constitution being optional, his attacks on judicial independence, and his general posture of claiming unlimited executive authority. The argument is that these claims and the actions flowing from them represent exactly the kind of executive overreach the Constitution was designed to prevent, and that the founders would have recognized as tyrannical. Haj.reads.537, filed on June 24, 2025, takes a narrower focus on abuse of war powers, specifically related to military strikes on Iran. The Constitution grants Congress the power to declare war and requires congressional authorization for major military actions. The War Powers Resolution establishes procedures for presidential use of military force, including notification requirements and time limits for operations conducted without congressional approval. This resolution alleges that Trump's Iran strikes violated these requirements, that he conducted significant military operations against a foreign nation without proper authorization and without following required procedures. The Iran strikes in question occurred earlier this year and immediately generated controversy about their legal basis. The administration claimed various justifications, including inherent presidential authority to protect American forces and interests abroad. Critics argued these justifications were insufficient for the scale of the operations conducted and that Congress should have been consulted before rather than after the strikes. The impeachment resolution represents an attempt to hold Trump accountable through the constitutional process, specifically designed for addressing presidential abuse of power. Representative Danadar's new announcement on December 4th adds fresh articles, specifically targeting Trump's attacks on the federal judiciary. This focus reflects the escalating conflict between Trump and the courts that has intensified dramatically in recent weeks. The walkout by a Supreme Court justice in response to Trump's claims that the Constitution doesn't apply to him, the pattern of court rulings against administration actions on immigration, troop deployments, and agency restructuring, Trump's statements calling judges lunatics and threatening them with impeachment for ruling against him, Chief Justice Roberts' rebuke of Trump's attacks on judicial independence. All of this forms the backdrop for impeachment articles focused specifically on the judiciary. The argument underlying these new articles is that Trump's attacks on courts represent a distinct category of constitutional violation deserving separate treatment. By attacking the legitimacy of judicial review, Trump undermines the mechanism through which constitutional limits on presidential power are enforced. If he succeeds in convincing enough people that courts are illegitimate and their rulings can be ignored, the entire constitutional system of checks and balances breaks down. This isn't just about individual court cases. It's about whether the constitutional framework itself can survive a president determined to operate outside its limits. The political dynamics of impeachment in a Republican-controlled House are complicated and require understanding what Democrats can realistically achieve versus what they're trying to accomplish through the process itself. Speaker Johnson is not going to allow impeachment articles to reach the floor for a vote. The Republican majority will not support removing Trump from office, regardless of what evidence or arguments Democrats present. In the narrow sense of actually removing the president, impeachment cannot succeed under current political conditions. But Democrats have other objectives that don't depend on removal. By filing impeachment resolutions and pushing for action, they create a documentary record of Trump's alleged misconduct that becomes part of the historical record. They force discussions and debates that highlight issues they want voters to focus on. Heading into 2026, they create opportunities to put Republican members on record defending Trump's conduct or voting against even considering the allegations. And they make the argument to voters that if Congress won't hold Trump accountable, voters must do so at the ballot box. Representative Al Green's continued advocacy for impeachment reflects the view that Congress has a constitutional duty to respond to presidential misconduct, regardless of whether removal is politically achievable. Green argues that failing to pursue impeachment normalizes the violations and invites future presidents to engage in similar conduct, knowing there will be no consequences. From this perspective, the process matters as much as the outcome. Going through the impeachment process establishes that this conduct is unacceptable, even if the Republican majority refuses to convict. The timing of the push, with Democrats aiming for Judiciary Committee action before year-end recesses, suggests urgency driven by both the accumulating scandals and the approaching 2026 election cycle. The Epstein revelations, the Venezuela controversy, the health concerns, the judicial conflicts, the Jack Smith subpoena, each crisis provides additional material for the argument that Trump has violated his oath and abused his power. Democrats want to consolidate these into a comprehensive case, while the individual scandals are still fresh in public memory. Okay, so let's break this down into the key points that everyone needs to understand, because this impeachment push has significant implications for the remainder of Trump's term and for the 2026 elections, regardless of whether removal actually occurs. Point number one, the scope of the allegations across these resolutions is genuinely extraordinary and represents an argument that Trump has violated his oath of office in multiple fundamental ways simultaneously: obstruction, bribery, abuse of war powers, constitutional violations, usurpation of congressional authority, attacks on judicial independence. This isn't a narrow technical dispute about one policy or one decision. It's an argument that the president has systematically operated outside constitutional bounds across virtually every domain of his authority. Whether you agree with the characterization or not, the breadth of the allegations is significant. Point number two, Democrats have strategic objectives beyond removal that make pursuing impeachment valuable, even knowing Republicans will block conviction. Creating a documentary record, forcing debates that highlight Trump's conduct, putting Republicans on record defending him, making the case to voters, all of these serve Democratic political interests heading into 2026, regardless of whether Trump is actually removed from office. The process itself accomplishes goals that don't depend on the outcome. Point number three, the focus on attacks on judicial independence in Thinadar's new articles connects impeachment directly to the ongoing constitutional crisis over Trump's claims that courts have no authority over him. By specifically targeting Trump's judicial attacks, Democrats are arguing that undermining the mechanism for enforcing constitutional limits is itself impeachable conduct, that you can't claim the Constitution doesn't apply to you and remain fit for an office that requires swearing to preserve, protect, and defend that Constitution. Point number four, the timing of this push, with multiple scandals converging, creates an environment where impeachment arguments may resonate more broadly than they would in isolation. The Epstein revelations raise questions about Trump's character and past associations. The Venezuela boat strike raises questions about his military judgment and honesty. The health concerns raise questions about his fitness. The judicial conflicts raise questions about his respect for constitutional limits. Each scandal reinforces the others in building a cumulative case for unfitness that impeachment advocates can point to. Point number five, even failed impeachment efforts establish historical precedents and records that shape how this period is understood and how future presidents calculate the cost of similar conduct. If Democrats pursue impeachment and Republicans block it, the historical record shows that Congress identified the conduct as problematic, even if partisan majorities prevented accountability. Future historians and legal scholars will have the documentary evidence of what was alleged and how different actors responded. The political implications for Republicans are significant because impeachment creates situations where they must actively defend Trump's conduct rather than simply ignoring it. Votes against impeachment proceedings become campaign issues. Statements defending Trump against specific allegations become material for opposition advertising. The more extreme Trump's conduct, claiming the Constitution doesn't apply to him, attacking judges as lunatics, the more uncomfortable the defense becomes for Republicans in competitive districts who need to appeal beyond the base. For swing voters, who will decide the 2026 elections, impeachment proceedings may serve to focus attention on Trump's conduct in ways that ordinary political coverage doesn't. The formal, serious nature of constitutional proceedings can cut through partisan noise and reach voters who tune out normal political battles. Whether that attention helps Democrats depends on how they present the case and whether the specific allegations resonate with the concerns of persuadable voters. The connection to Trump's 36% approval rating matters because it suggests the political environment is already unfavorable for Trump and Republicans defending him. Impeachment proceedings that highlight his most problematic conduct could push those numbers even lower, which would have downstream effects on Republican candidates across the country. Conversely, if impeachment is seen as overreach or partisan warfare, it could potentially help Trump by allowing him to claim victim status and rally his base. The War Powers article in A.Res.537 raises particularly significant constitutional questions that extend beyond Trump to the broader issue of presidential authority to conduct military operations without congressional authorization. Presidents of both parties have claimed broad authority to use military force without explicit congressional approval, and courts have generally avoided ruling definitively on these separation of powers questions. An impeachment focused specifically on unauthorized military action would force a political branch judgment on issues courts have dodged. Representative Al Green's long advocacy for impeachment provides continuity with efforts during Trump's first term and signals that at least some Democrats view impeachment as an ongoing obligation rather than a one-time response to a specific crisis. Green argued for impeachment before the first impeachment actually occurred and has continued arguing for it throughout Trump's second term. His persistence reflects a view that Trump's conduct is consistently impeachable and that Congress should consistently respond. The practical obstacles to actually removing Trump remain formidable regardless of how strong the case might be. Republicans control the House and would have to allow proceedings to move forward. Even if the House somehow impeach, conviction requires 2/3 of the Senate, 67 votes that Democrats simply don't have. Trump survived 2 previous impeachments during his first term with Republican support largely intact. There's no evidence that Republican willingness to defend Trump has diminished despite the accumulated scandals of his second term, but the practical obstacles to removal don't necessarily mean impeachment efforts are futile or purely symbolic. The process creates records, it forces debates, it puts people on record, it communicates to voters what's at stake, it establishes precedents for how future Congresses might respond to similar conduct. These outcomes have value independent of whether Trump is actually removed from office, which is why Democrats continue pursuing impeachment despite knowing conviction is unlikely. The year-end timing deadline Democrats have set for themselves creates urgency that could affect how proceedings unfold. If they're serious about Judiciary Committee action before recesses, they need to move quickly on scheduling and procedural steps. The compressed timeline might limit how thorough the proceedings can be, but it also ensures the impeachment push doesn't lose momentum or get overtaken by other events. Looking ahead, the impeachment dynamics will interact with everything else happening in Trump's turbulent presidency. The December 17th Jack Smith deposition, the December 19th Epstein files deadline, the ongoing health concerns, the Republican infighting. Each development provides additional material for or against the impeachment case and affects the political environment in which impeachment is being debated. The convergence of all these crises during the holiday period creates an extraordinarily volatile political moment. The fundamental question impeachment raises is whether there are any limits on presidential conduct that trigger actual consequences. Democrats argue Trump has violated his oath in multiple fundamental ways and that constitutional accountability requires responding through the process the Constitution provides. Republicans argue impeachment is politically motivated overreach that voters should reject. Voters will ultimately decide which view prevails, but the debate itself shapes public understanding of what presidents can and cannot do without consequence. Anyway, that's where things stand with this accelerating impeachment push that's bringing new urgency to conflicts that have been building throughout Trump's troubled second term. The multiple resolutions with their comprehensive allegations, the strategic objectives beyond removal that make the process valuable to Democrats regardless of outcome, the focus on judicial attacks, connecting to the constitutional crisis over Trump's claims of unlimited power, the timing with scandals converging, and the historical record being created regardless of whether conviction occurs. Make sure you're subscribed because impeachment developments will continue unfolding as Democrats push for action and Republicans resist. Whether proceedings advance through committee, whether votes occur that put members on record, whether the political impact helps or hurts either party heading into 2026, all of it will play out over the coming weeks alongside all the other crises consuming this presidency. And if you think the pressure on Trump is intense now with impeachment resolutions pending and scandals converging, just wait until Democrats start making their case in detail and forcing Republicans to defend conduct that's becoming increasingly indefensible. I'll see you in the next one.